So I want to delve a little bit into the front end and show you what happens. Now, I'm going to go up here and this is in our sample application. And if I do keyword search, we see this little search box. If I do something else, it'll give me a different thing, like create issue. We'll go back to keyword search. The search box has a button on it called search, and it has the title and stuff. What happens is I have a template, and I'm just going to do a search for connection here. There's only a couple issues that have been created. And when I click on search, this form, we're going to pull values out of it. So if we go find the place where we have keyword search, here's keyword search inside the menu. And you'll notice that it's an anchor, and it does some things so that when it gets clicked, it calls this render search function. Now, chances are you can't find render search in the code. It's created at runtime from a template called render keyword search. Okay, now somewhere in here there's going to be a template keyword search, and that is a piece of code in HTML. Yes, here it is, and you'll see that it has a form that has a label. Okay, these labels are search keywords. Okay, there's your label being rendered in the front end, and it has an input with a name called KW. KW is going to show up in our code. Now, this template gets turned into a piece of code that I can call that paints it in the user interface. That's the render function. So when it gets called, calls a function related to this. Down here we have data click, we have submit keyword search. So it's going to call that function in the code when that button gets hit. The function is then going to go out to the form, pull out the data out of the form, and it's going to do something. That's the something we want to look at, because this is the normal way that you tie all these things together. There's some sort of a click, a menu, that ended up rendering something to the screen. That something on the screen had some things happen, and then somebody hit a button, they typed a character, they hit enter, that resulted in calling another function, in this case submit keyword search, and that function then goes and does something. So that's kind of the here's how the user interface works 101. Now, in this case, this is a button in our stuff instead of an anchor, but anchors and buttons are very similar. They can call a function, and we're going to look for that value right there. Now, the file that I'm editing is in our assignment, www.index.html. And if I go searching for this submit keyword, it's not in here because it's actually in a separate file of JavaScript, I believe called application something. So let's go find application code, and that is in www.js application code. And I'm looking for submit keyword search. Now, when you click on a button, it creates in the browser an event. The normal thing for that event is to submit the form. But I don't really want to submit the form. I want to take that form and process it in a different way. So I'm actually going to stop the event from happening. That's what this prevent default does. And so instead of it submitting the form, it's going to process it on the front end in a different fashion and call something else. So it calls prevent default. Then I pull off. I'm using a library called jQuery. This $sign is a function call. It says for the thing with an ID of KW, you'll remember that my input field is called KW, get me the value and stick it into this data structure up here so that I have it. And then I'm going to render keyword dashboard. And I believe that is actually a render function also. So all the render functions paint something on the user interface. So if I go back over here and I do the search, you'll see that it brings up the list of issues, which is a render function. And the list of issues is matched with a keyword search, which means it makes a call to the back end, and then it paints this form with these things in it. I can refresh the list. I can do things with it. But basically what I've done is I've said, okay, when you submit this, I need to tack these things together. An awful lot of what goes on in front-end code is basically tacking pieces together. So let's go find where we actually make the call to get the data. And that has to be somewhere in the pre-keyword dashboard stuff. Okay, pre-keyword doesn't seem to do anything. It waits for post-keyword. And here's the piece I want to show you. Okay, because here's, how you render a table using this particular set of libraries. But you'll notice that there is an URL, API v1 keyword or search keyword. That's what we're calling on the back end. We're passing it as a value. The data is keyword. Remember, we set this up as a global data thing in window. So we pull that in. And then we add this random number, so we do cache bursting. And we basically do what? A $.ajax. Ajax is a request in the browser in JavaScript using the jQuery library. The type is a get. Here's the URL, the data. And if it succeeds, we do whatever it is this function is, which is set up and paint data into a table. And it looks like there's a fair amount of data that gets painted in. But the point is that when the data comes back, after the call to the back end, it comes back in this data type data. We have a commented out thing here to print it. It'll actually print without that because I've done some stuff in the libraries underneath so that it prints to the console in the browser every time. And then it goes out and it sets up and it renders this thing. In the middle of all of it, there is this render table 2, and it says at this location called #form1, take this data and this configuration and take all the data and render it into that table. And then it, adds stuff to the table so that it has, nice things in the table. Okay? It also has an error function with the horrible error message XYZZY title doc. I should really change that error message. I think some of you have seen that error message in some other stuff, and I should have a better error message than that. But here's what it does. On success, it paints a table. On failure, it gives you a bad error message. But if you're wondering where the call happens, okay, all the calls to the back end take this form in this application. They're all $Ajax with a type, an URL, a data, and a function called success that handles whatever it is when the data comes back. So if you're poking through the front-end code, there's only two files you really need to look at, and that's the index.html and this application code. They're all in those two files, and that's what you're looking for, is a trace between some event happening on the front end, pulling data out of a form, running it, and then turning around and painting the data back onto the front end.